Good morning, I'm Charles Ellison, and welcome to another Movement series brought to you by the Council of State Governments Eastern Regional Conference Council on Communities of Color. I'm the producer, also host, moderator of this series of discussions that we've been holding since last year, since the beginning of pandemic. For more information on the Council of State Governments Eastern Regional Conference, go to csg-erc.org. I'm Charles Ellison. I'm typically also host, executive producer of Reality Check, a daily public affairs program on WURD radio, and also publisher of the BEnote.com. Today's discussion is back to school, reimagining K-12 education. We've got a fantastic panel lined up for you today. Very much looking forward to that discussion. We're going to introduce them in a moment. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please, everyone who's just watching, please stay on mute and stay off camera if you are not a panelist. So that's one. Two, if you have questions, feel free to leave those questions in the Zoom group chat. I will look out for that and I will relay those questions. I have questions, but I know you probably have some questions out there too. I will relay those questions to the panelists at a certain point during this hour-long discussion. And also, I just have to reiterate, just please keep if you're not a panelist, please keep your mics on mute and please stay off camera. Really, truly appreciate that. Also, a hashtag movement series. We're trying to build up the social media conversation at hashtag movement series on social media, especially on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Ellison Report on Twitter.com. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. And so joining us right now, you can watch them on Zoom. We have Senator Elizabeth Lockman, who is a member of the Delaware State Senate, the Delaware General Assembly, who's there. Also joining us from Colorado is Senator Angela Williams, who's with the Colorado, a senator, a member of the Colorado General Assembly, joining us from Denver, Colorado, I suspect. And also is works in external affairs at Stride Incorporated as well. So we also have a little bit down bottom screen, bottom row, Michelle Harvey, Vice President at Learn for Life Schools based out in California, and Arlene Sukrin, who's a Vice President at TNTP, so also formerly known as the New Teachers Project. But good to have you, Arlene. And Sonia Allen is a career strategist and author of a book that you definitely should check out when you get a chance. I love this title, I Kick Ass at Work. So she's a longtime communications and career strategist, also joining us here on panel. So it's actually the first time for some of you on a movement series micro summit, and welcome. And so we're definitely looking forward to having this conversation about the state of K-12 education. Senator Lockman, I'll start with you. We had already something of a broken K-12 education system before pandemic for quite a long time, for generations. And it's even more broken when we talk about Black students and when we talk about also students from other demographics, Brown, Indigenous folks as well. So when we talk about this big moment we might have to reimagine the K-12 system to fix it finally, what does that look like to you?
Great question, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join this micro summit on this important topic. I don't know that I can say I know what we're going to look like when we get sort of to the other side of this transition, but I agree it's an incredible opportunity. I think what's happened during the pandemic is we've really seen a lot of walls around education come down in terms of being able to be much more clear-eyed about what's happening. We've talked about the dysfunction. We know it's there, those of us who have been deeply involved in one way or another with our school systems, but now it's really, it's literally come into our homes, and we've really been able to observe things that don't work, and also I think begin to trip upon things that do work, and confront some of the assumptions that we might have had about things like virtual learning and all of that. And so what it looks like on the other side, I think is just a much less walled off experience. I think we've seen our schools function in a very siloed way, that has been harmful, particularly I think for vulnerable Black and Brown students. And now we have this opportunity to keep those walls down in a way, to foster collaboration and partnership with different types of entities, to allow parents to be more engaged, and all sorts of things. So just to be brief, that's where I think we're going. I think we're seeing the school walls, if not coming down, becoming more transparent, and giving us an opportunity to really tackle the issues that we knew were there, and lean into some really exciting, innovative ways to enhance education and make it more community connected, more student connected and driven.
You know what I love about this discussion? We're going from East Coast to West Coast. So we have Senator Lockman in East Coast and Delaware. We're going to go to Senator Williams out there, not so much West Coast, but out West, definitely, Rocky Mountains, to get perspective from, folks don't realize, especially Denver metropolitan area where you represent, constituent senator, it's a massive area, and education is a big topic. And so this reimagining that we're seeing right now, where do you think it's headed?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Charles. And it's an honor to be here with all of my fellow sisters on this important issue. Charles, I think that as we look at reimagining K-12, as we've gone through COVID, it's definitely created some transparency. I believe that it has allowed parents to really take a time out to reevaluate what education looks like for their children, but also what their family life is like, and what we've gone through COVID. Parents have taken a step back. I think they're reevaluating, and what it's going to look like is, I call it a paradigm shift. And because parents have taken a time out, school districts, some things have been made apparent, that it's not this, the kids that are broken, it's the systems. And we need to focus more on our students. What is best for our students and for our parents? And how do we also educate parents of color, those who are in low-income communities, English language learners, the indigenous, the LGBTQ kids? We really need to stop and let's educate parents on what their choices are in the best learning environment for their students. Colorado is a very progressive state. We're pretty liberal on following the students. And another whole conversation we could have is, how do we fund education to make sure parents can have those choices, and it's not driven by their zip code? So when we get on the other side, I believe that, education is going to look very different, and it'll really take brick and mortar schools the opportunity to really take a chance and say, okay, this is going to look different than it traditionally has. Because I believe parents will take the lead on what they believe is the best learning environment for their children.
What do you think, Michelle? Especially you out there in California, overseeing this vast school system, it's like tens of thousands of students, mostly Black and Latino students as well, right? And many low income, many out of distressed socioeconomic circumstances, many of them also dropouts. But where are you seeing this reimagining going, and the types of decisions that families, that parents and students have to make as they're going through that reimagining?
Yes, I 100% agree to start with. Those were some great points. Our organization did a survey in April of 21 with parents, over 800 respondents, and 82% of the parents said that equity in education is very important to them. 88% said it's important to serve individual students because a one-size approach does not work for kids. 86% said that it's important to address social inequalities that exist within our schools, and also that parents and caregivers, over 86% believe, should be able to make their own choices. I am a choice advocate, and I do believe that parents have to be able to decide what is best for their students. and to be given, opportunities as far as resources are concerned to make the best decisions.
Arlene, and when you're hearing this too, we're talking about the parents and the students, but, enormous pressure on the systems because this is a big disruption, not just in terms of the pandemic, but in terms of, people seeing new ways, new constructs of doing things, of learning. They're saying, wait, there's another whole vast new universe in terms of how my kid can be educated and learn. But also you're seeing, like, for example, Black parents. I saw an Associated Press article just the other day where they were, now there's a realization coming about where a lot of Black parents are being candid and saying, hey, you know what? Actually, pandemic showed me that I don't like my kids in these environments anyway. These are very abusive, hostile, harassing, sometimes racist environments. There's a lot of bullying going on. How do the systems respond to this? Also, how do the teachers also adjust to all of this?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having me today. I think, as I reflect, I think this really presents a unique opportunity for us to, as a system, as educators, myself as a lifelong educator, to really determine and realize that our parents are really the experts for their children and their learning. And so what that means is that we need to authentically engage with our parents. We need to make sure their voices are heard and that their voices impact the educational opportunities for their children. And so that means making sure that parents have the opportunity to give input on their children's daily experiences in the classrooms, everything from the classes that they're taking to the activities that they're participating throughout the day. So I think that's one. I think the second thing is that we need to make sure that the materials that our students are receiving, the assignments that they are receiving, are grade level appropriate. If the student is in 8th grade, we need to make sure they're getting rigorous, curricular activities that are aligned with 8th grade. And so at TNTP, we talk a lot about what's called this solution that's called learning acceleration, which is the idea that we should prioritize access to grade appropriate assignments for all students, regardless of their background or their previous achievement. Instead of focusing on remediation, which is constantly going back to figure out what they missed, we really need to accelerate learning. And if the student hasn't mastered the earlier skills that are required to complete that grade level appropriate assignment, they receive just-in-time teaching, giving the student just the right amount of help to move forward right when they need it. We just strongly believe in grade level appropriate assignments, and that is really a path to move forward after this pandemic, and then partnering with our parents.
Mm-hmm. So Sonia, as you're listening to all of this discussion between the policymakers and the educators, right? What's really important and really crucial here is that these systems are reimagined, restructured, reconstructed in a way that make these young people competitive for the future. What's going to happen? Are they going to receive the type of, learning skill sets? Are they going to receive the type of training they need to have the skills necessary to compete in the workforce, especially an increasingly globalized and competitive and technologically advanced workforce? And so as you're seeing this whole debate unfold about what do schools need to look like, how do they need to operate, what's in your mind as a career strategist? Do you think that these schools are in a position, or what do they need to do to be in a position to prepare young people for the careers of the future?
Yeah. Good morning, Charles, and good morning to everyone else. And also thank you for having me here. What's interesting is, so I'm not on the front lines of education, but my daughter is an educator in Atlanta, and I've had the opportunity to sit in her classroom. And so there's always a lot of conversations around parents being engaged and being involved. But what was interesting for me just to sit as an observer is to see what it looks like when parents are engaged in one classroom, when parents are engaged, but also to look at what happens to children where parents are not engaged and not involved at all. And so I think that we as a community, because although, like I said, I'm not on the front lines of education, I do see I see the impact of education when people enter into the workforce, having worked with a lot of young people. And what I have seen is the lack of experiences. I think that we tend to focus on technical experiences in the classroom, but if we could focus on more social and cultural experiences, exposing kids to opportunities and having them see what these classroom experiences can provide for them in the long run and can provide for them in their futures. I mean, when I think about my career journey, you know, I was always interested in journalism, but the only person I saw was Barbara Walters. I'm at that age. That was the only woman on television. In terms of Black people, Carol Simpson did an evening news and Max Robinson, that was it. And so I ended up going into publishing, but I didn't know editors existed. I didn't know what they did. And so I think that if we could create more experiences, I have a friend who runs an organization called World of Money, which teaches kids from the age of 7 to 18 about financial experiences. And she teaches them at a level where they look at the impact of finances in their day-to-day lives, but also how finances can change economies. And it sparks something in children, right? It allows them to see things differently and experience things differently. And so I think if we could create more experiences, and I have a lot of respect for the education system because they do a lot and they have a lot of passion around helping children with very little resources. And so I do think that when we talk about reimagining education, it's going to take more of us to get involved to be able to show these children that there's a wide world out there, and that you can have these experiences, but more importantly, to show the connection to what's going on in the classroom and how this is going to impact your life or could impact your life in the future.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy that, you know, that's why I wanted to bring someone like you on, Sonia, to see like, okay, well, you know, what happens downstream, right? Like, you know, particularly after these young people, after they leave elementary, secondary education, or are they prepared? And what are those tools? What's that tool belt, that arsenal that they need to be competitive and to be productive? So that's real important. So Senator Lockman, going back to you. And oh, by the way, too, before I go ask you this next question, Senator Lockman, just to remind everyone, on social media, it's #MovementSeries. Also at Black Ed Chat is one of our social media, our relevant social media properties. And so they're going to be, I'm actually taking notes, and there's clips of this conversation at Black Ed Chat that'll be showing up momentarily. But #MovementSeries, if folks who are listening and are watching us would like to offer any kind of insights, you can leave questions. If you are now watching this, and I saw a few people come in a little bit later, if you're now watching this, please stay on mute. And also, please keep your cameras off, but you can ask questions in the Zoom group chat. You can do that now. And I'll fit them in throughout the course of this conversation. And Senator Lockman, curriculum. Yeah, I mean, how should school districts, how should educators, teachers adjust in terms of curriculum? Because we are also having a big clash over what curriculum should look like. And not just in terms of like, you know, the basic sort of reading and math proficiency, but, you know, also, you know, big clash over history. Like, what sort of history should we be teaching our students? You know, the big clash over the 1619 project, for example, that comes to mind. So what does that curriculum look like? How should they adjust?
I mean, I think, just to be very simple about it, our curriculum needs to reflect all of our students. And we know that we've struggled, to put it diplomatically, to have our Black and Brown students reflected in our curriculum. And I think that is becoming a really core priority for many legislators, certainly for our students. And a lot of educators are getting more vocal about it, you know, with everything that we've been through in this past year, the inflection around the Black Lives Matter conversation. I think a lot of really important things are happening. And I think it's connected to everything else that's being discussed in terms of career and technical education, and, you know, the sense of families seeing our school environments as hostile, the lack of productive engagement between communities and schools are all related to this curriculum issue. I think, I co-chair an effort in Delaware called the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity, and we have a lot of meetings with superintendents and colleges that are doing teacher education, and it keeps coming back to this fundamental idea of like, you're not going to have equity without true, meaningful respectful engagement with communities, letting communities in, letting communities drive and help you define things like what comes into the curriculum even. And so I think it all ends up very connected, and I'm sure we're seeing tension all over the nation about this. We certainly are in Delaware. Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker and I are running a bill to center African-American history in our schools. We're seeing some really ugly pushback, although by and large, most of our colleagues are supportive. These conversations are happening on the school board level, and you're seeing that reflected in school board races, which for us culminate next week. You're seeing a lot of anti-critical race theory candidates and things like this. It's fascinating, I think, but I think obviously where we're going when we allow our communities in, when we allow our students to have agency over their education, you're going to see our culture, our history reflected in the curriculum, not just history, but in math, in science, in all the ways. And you're seeing significant pushback to our progress to, I think, that very natural goal and evolution of education in these governance and engagement spaces. So.
And Senator Williams, what is that that conversation, that engagement, that battle, in some respects? I know you had a recent controversy actually just over the past day or two in the Colorado General Assembly. We don't need to go into that, but I am very curious about, with tensions like that, what is that? Because I know education is a very, very serious topic in Colorado, and especially in the Denver metro area. What does that conversation over curriculum look like? What young people are learning?
Well, I think that, as the representative from Delaware said, that, we are going to have to continue to integrate, cultural, not only curriculums, and I know that in states across this country who have tried to implement curriculum of culture, whether it be, African-American history, you mentioned 1619, whether that be Latino history or Native American history. And, we've seen resistance across the country, and some states have had successes doing that in integrating that curriculum, number one, along with teachers that look like the children that we are serving. And so I think we have to continue to work at that. And I know we'll probably be talking about how do we recruit more teachers of colors into our classrooms. But I think this is going to take some time. But like I said, we've seen some successes across the country. In other states, it's not. I think a part of removing mascots that are offensive to other cultures is a step in the right direction also. So it's just not, the classroom experience and what we're teaching, but how do we teach others and to be aware of diversity in other cultures so that all children can, understand what's really going on in our country right now. Right. And I think it'll make them better adults.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that's like one big component. It really kind of makes or prompts me to think that we're probably going to need to have like a separate future discussion on that, right? I think people really truly underestimate the value of that, of like, that inclusiveness, that inclusiveness in terms of the curriculum and in the classroom. It really avoids a lot of trouble, years later. When, some of the issues that we're dealing with now as adults and these tensions and these divisions are from, people just not being kind of in the same rooms or not having the same experiences or not learning about different perspectives and experiences. It's really profound to kind of watch, to realize how a lot of this could have been avoided, right? Michelle, going to you in terms of, because Senator Williams raises a good point about the educators. And we have now a situation in America where Black, Latino, also Asian, Pacific Islander students, they are like pretty much, now have like outpaced the white student population in terms of when we look at K-12 education, when we look at especially public schools. And, but, there's a huge and very alarming underrepresentation of Black and Latino teachers. How do we fix that? Or like, looking at a school system like yours, like Learn for Life, how have you all fixed that, particularly with that individualized approach?
Well, first, Charles, generally, I want to say I'm just so happy this question came to me. It's very simple. We pretend that we don't understand how to fill our classrooms with Indigenous, BIPOC populations of people. And the reality is that if we want to have more Black, Latino, people of color, doctors, judges, teachers, we need to support HBCUs. And that is becoming very obvious to people. Over 80% of lawyers and judges who are Black and of color come from HBCUs. 70% of doctors, almost 65% of all teachers of color. I graduated from Winston-Salem State University in 1862. It was the Slater Industrial Academy. It became known as a normal teacher school. It's a traditional teacher preparation program. And for decades, that school has put out teachers of high caliber, quality all over the country. And there are numerous HBCUs. Just to kind of bring that home to where we are today, companies like Tesla are recruiting in HBCUs because these are agricultural and technical universities that focus on things like machine learning, new innovative processes that people need in the workspace. And also I was waiting for the opportunity, Charles, to go back because Sonia really nailed this. It is all about access in education. What you can't see, you cannot be. It is just simple as that. And if we cannot see people like us in the classrooms, then we do minimize our access to opportunities, because if you don't know that something is possible, then you can't strive for that. So I do believe that the key is supporting the institutions that support our needs. And if we need more teachers who are people of color, then let's support the institutions that educate those people. If we want more out of our Indigenous communities, and I'm going to get off my soapbox, then support the programs that support Indigenous communities. This is not rocket science.
Arlene, some thoughts if you want to expound on that. Yeah, like how do we open up those Black teacher, Indigenous teacher, other people of color pipelines, because you often hear that refrain in other industries. Oh, I can't find them. I don't know where they are. I don't know where the talent is. We can't hire. We're not hiring Black people because we can't find talent or people in that space. And so it gets into a conversation about their own social networks. But yeah, how do we open up those educator pipelines?
Yeah, well, to your question, they exist. We have many teachers or college students who are interested in the education community, and we need to be looking at the teacher preparation programs in the university as well as alternative teacher residency programs, or perhaps career changers, adults later on in life who are looking for a different opportunity can go back and get their teaching credential. And then I think what's really important, and I'll just add to what Michelle mentioned, is once we have more teachers of color and all teachers, we need to do a better job of retaining them in the classroom, because it's one thing to get the teachers, it's another thing to retain them, to make sure they're getting the adequate professional development they need, the resources they need, the guidance they need, the care, professionalism they need from their managers, from the systems, and from our community. Our teachers are incredibly important. And once we recruit them, we really have to focus on retaining them in the classroom by giving them the support that they need to do this incredibly difficult job. I think that's also part of the conversation as well. How do we retain them? And I think we know how to do it. We just need to make sure we're doing a better job of it for all teachers.
Yeah, because it is a problem when you have this very diverse school population, K-12 school population. But what is it like? I think it's over 70% of the educators are white, and primarily white female, if I'm not mistaken. Was looking at that last data set. So that becomes problematic. Sonia, you know, when you look, you know, teachers, right? And so, I mean, is that, and you were saying how your daughter is an educator right now. And so like, when we talk about like the professional development, the training, a career to go into, but, you know, teaching is, you know, the way that society views teaching, I feel like, like a lot of times families, parents tend to look at schools as like daycare. And so they're not appreciating, you know, the value of teachers and the really intense job that teachers have to do. How do we get society, however, to, as we're going through this paradigm shift, right? As Senator Williams was describing it, this paradigm shift, how do we get people more interested in the profession of teaching so we can bring it back, bring the teaching back?
Well, yeah, I mean, we pay a lot of lip service to appreciating teachers. But in corporate America, you know what's important by where they allocate resources. So if they want to drive a particular aspect of their business, if they want to grow a particular aspect of their business, then they allocate people and resources to that. And so we've spent a lot of years and a lot of time talking about how important teachers are, but we don't pay them. We don't pay them the value that we feel that they deserve. And so I know people, and I'm sure many of us know people who would love to be teachers. My brother would love to be a teacher, but wouldn't be able to raise manage his family on a teacher's salary. Mm-hmm. And so if we say it's important, then, you know, the cliche of putting our money where our mouth is what we have to start looking at. And so when you look at in New York City, we have the independent schools, right? Where we see where teachers are paid very differently than they're paid in the public system. Right? And we can look at the education levels of those students and see how they perform on tests, the programs that they get into, the international travel that they're exposed to, the college tours that they begin in their freshman year of high school. Like in certain communities, everything is geared to making sure that these kids succeed. And in our communities, we talk about the importance. We talk about how we need parents to be more engaged, but we don't put money where we think it's important. And until we're really having that conversation, really looking at what we're paying our educators, instead of saying, yes, they're important, we believe in them, we need to support them, and really figuring out how they can make a living. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of young white kids who, like teaching is a way to give back, and it's engaging for them, and it's a new experience. For many people in our community, the economies are real. And if you're not being paid and you have to raise a family, then you have to look at other alternatives to do that.
Yeah. And at one time, like, for example, I mean, teaching was what helped build the Black middle class.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there's a feeling that that's not the case anymore. Senator Williams, I want to go to you because now talking about paradigm shifts, and one aspect of that paradigm shift we have not touched on just yet, but I'm ready to touch on it now, is the virtual learning approach that we're seeing that had been embraced during this period of pandemic. At one point before pandemic, society at large had a lot of trepidation with respect to remote learning, virtual learning, online learning. You're doing some work for it, Stride Incorporated, which is used to be K-12, which is like the leader in virtual learning. What have you all seen? Because now we're seeing studies, we're seeing research data showing that, hey, this is probably not such a bad thing, this virtual learning, but where is it headed and how do we need to, because, you know, something that you opened my eyes to in a recent conversation we had on WURD, you were saying there's a difference between remote learning and virtual learning. You made a very clear distinction on that. Talk about that distinction.
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, we at Stride are a virtual learning company. We've been in business over 20 years, and I think people need to understand that as far as we are as Stride. It's not like we were thrown into the thrust because as a result of COVID. And we have platforms, we have, you know, our teachers that we develop and we train. We give kids everything they need to be successful, and coaches for those parents who choose a virtual learning environment across the country. We're present right now in 36 states. But what's important to understand also is because of COVID, you know, there was what we say remote learning, right? In which our public brick and mortar schools, they gave the teachers a computer and just said, here, go teach. just like we're having this conversation here, without any infrastructure there around teachers teaching and curriculum and having coaches. So I think that what we will see as there was an uptick in virtual learning as our parents have stepped back to say, okay, I have to keep this curriculum and my child's learning moving, because we didn't want them to fall behind. And that's where Stride played a critical part in our country for those parents. But as we move forward, Charles, I think what we're going to see is parents starting to reevaluate just a bit. Those who are in brick and mortar schools that say, you know what, maybe a hybrid version is what we should be moving to. Here in Colorado, we've had some of those conversations where it's important for their children to go into the brick and mortar schools, have some interaction socially. We don't want to isolate them, but other parents are saying also, you know what, my child is performing at an exceptional rate in a virtual environment. So I really see us going to either more virtual environments or where we, you know, virtual providers partner with brick and mortar schools, and we offer what we call a hybrid version.
Hey, Senator Williams, right, real quick follow-up question on that, because I am curious, because a lot of the reluctance to embrace virtual learning before pandemic stemmed from, you know, there was some tension there, some conflict from, like, you know, teachers unions, for example, you know, teachers trying to figure out, okay, well, what's this going to do? How's this going to impact our jobs, or the way that we teach, or the way that we learn? How's it also going to impact our salaries, et cetera? How have you worked through those tensions in a state like Colorado? How do you think other legislators and policymakers in other places have to work through those tensions? Because I guess now teachers are, like, as you said, you know, if the school district set up the infrastructure, the appropriate infrastructure, and do this correctly, you know, it is something that teachers can do or learn to do.
Well, I think that, you know, it does scare a lot of those in the traditional brick and mortar environment. And what you'll hear across the country in legislatures is that, but yes, you're taking money away from public schools. And, you know, that's another whole conversation, Charles, as you know, and, you know, unions are going to represent their teachers. But I think we all have to step back and say, what is best for the student? We have to be a student-centric mentality across this country and allow parents to have options and choices of where they send their kids. And it's not necessarily about protecting your members. It's about how do we work towards the student and not systems and other environments other than the child. The child needs to be our focus. But, you know, we work through those. We want to be partners. I think all virtual providers, particularly Stride, we want to be partners with brick and mortar schools because it's about delivering that curriculum. That's what we're talking about. The classroom experience, whether that be in your kitchen, your living room, or whether you're in a classroom environment, we want to be partners to help deliver the best curriculum so that our children succeed. And I think that's how we overcome that, is get people to open up their minds about delivering education to our students.
Senator Lockman, yeah, like that transition, that shift to virtual learning, how's a state like Delaware handling it? How should policymakers handle that? I mean, is that hybrid approach, do you feel as well that is the construct of our learning future? But how do we adapt to it?
I mean, I think that the question will be ongoing. I think policymakers often take a little bit to catch up, to figure out how do we create a framework to enable, you know, that innovation to happen. And I think that's something that we certainly are struggling with. I still hear a lot of entrenched points of view in terms of, like, the possibility of having 100% virtual school, for example. I don't see as much traction for that. However, when I talk to parents and even when I talk to educators, I see enthusiasm for, you know, some element of virtual schooling, at least a hybrid, to be able to continue. I think there was just so much excitement to fully realize the possibility of what it means and the collaboration that it enables. You know, I think that's part of that story of being able to let families and community members in, other institutions in our community in without being physically present. Amazing educators from across the globe. I mean, we're together now with each of us sitting in different spots across the country. And I think when people really got a taste of what it's like to be able to, you know, have a professional, into that classroom, show students professionals in different fields who look like them, you know, amazing educators in different subjects, which aren't able to be represented on perhaps a particular school staff. That is an opportunity that is just too rich to leave on the table. And I think our families see that. I think our educators and our administrators see that. So I think there is definitely an appetite and enthusiasm to keep that door open. I think the pressures that puts on our sense of the traditional will continue to be a conversation. But I do think now that we've seen the possibility, it's going to be a lot easier to engage in those conversations and work through that. But yeah, we're not going back to a world where the walls are opaque and we aren't able to have that collaborative and partnership opportunity that virtual enables.
Right.
And I think that's great.
Right. You know, I want to throw in a question that we got from one of the audience members. Before we get, I do have some more questions, some follow-up as far as like, you know, just sort of this new learning horizon that we're looking at in the future. But there was a Shirley Gerard who is asking about, had a question. She's a college level nursing educator. She's concerned about how colleges are increasing class sizes without the educational support so many of our students need. And Michelle, this is a good question for you to kind of start on. How can college level educators help? Because you kind of hinted at that in your last statement about, you know, okay, hey, if we want to get more Black educators, you know, HBCUs, or, you know, go to Indigenous and Latino or Hispanic serving institutions to, you know, grow that pipeline. But address that question by Shirley Gerard if you can.
I think that colleges, and I also sat on the board of a community college here in California, they need the same type of wraparound supports that we see in our K-12 institutions. When students go to college, their need for food or, you know, work or mental health care does not go away. And so colleges have to be able to put these services in place for students. But by the same token, colleges depend on tuition and boarding to operate their schools. And with the pandemic, I'm sure that we may be seeing increased class sizes, less resources, but they're going to have to tap in like every other institution to be able to plan properly and to allocate resources that they get from the federal government into the right spaces. Charles, quickly, I do want to say that seat time is something that I think as we reimagine education post-pandemic, we're going to have to reevaluate our funding mechanisms in education and how you know, seat time is what we base those things on, not necessarily mastery of content or real-time learning. So we're going to have to look at that. It's something that from a policy area, I have been concerned and working with my colleagues at Learn for Life for years. We operate a non-classroom based program for students who may be pregnant, parenting, working, and so they need that flexibility to be able to go to school. And here in California, we are seeing legislation that is approaching the horizon, such as AB 1316, that looks to put numerous restrictions on programs like the one I'm describing. If we really want to reimagine education, we need to reimagine it without the brick and mortar structures being all that's at the front of our minds. We've heard about virtual education. We've even heard about the difference between virtual and remote, which is extremely important. And so if we're going to reimagine schools, let's stop using the antiquated 19th century industrial model of education as, our starting place, because the reality is, if you go in the kitchen and you drop a glass, you don't reimagine the glass, you get a new one. And so those are the type of bold thoughts we're going to have about education, not just post-pandemic, but in the 21st century as a whole.
That leads to and Arlene, I'd like you to kind of expound on or respond to what Michelle was saying, because this is a very important point about, we're so used to, we all grew up with, for example, like I grew up Gen X, we grew up with, the time you spend in the classroom, but there was a question or a question statement from Christina Sappy, who's an audience member here watching. How education is funded by states is critically important. I'm going to get to the legislators later on this question too. In PA, we fund by property tax, which creates incredible inequity. Need to utilize a fair funding formula. We also need to address the serious teacher shortage we have. We don't have as many going into the profession because of the incredible amount of unfunded mandates and the low pay, which Sonia, you talked about earlier on. But Arlene, that and Christina Sappy is a legislator, by the way. I'm not sure from which state, but legislator Sappy, thank you so much for, Pennsylvania. And thank you for joining us too. I appreciate that. Arlene, if you want to talk about that, about like how we need to completely overhaul the way we've been seeing or, just accepting education for so many, the antiquated, 19th century, kind of farm schedule model.
Mm-hmm. Happy to, I think a couple of things. So one, we know that funding equity is incredibly important. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm also thinking about our research at TNTP regarding the opportunity myth. And we talk a lot about the inequities that are happening now during the pandemic, but we know that inequity has always existed and existed well before the pandemic began. So a couple of stats that are really, troubling, frankly, is that, through our research, we found that students spend more than 500 hours per school year on assignments that were not on grade level and were not appropriate. And we know that for students of color, 4 out of 10 classrooms with a majority of students of color never received a single grade level assignment. And so, when we're talking about equity, we really need to also be talking about equity in terms of what are students getting in front of their, as part of their assignments? Are they truly getting grade level appropriate assignments? Are they ready to go to college and graduate from college? And our research shows us that overall in our country, our students are not getting grade level appropriate assignments, but in particular, if you're students of color, a BIPOC student, 4 out of 10 classrooms, you may never receive a single grade level assignment. And so that is really what, our research has showed us at TNTP. And that is really why we want to push the conversation to, even with the resources that you have right now, are you giving students grade level appropriate assignments? Are you giving them a fighting chance? Just give an opportunity to try, because if you're not, then how can they possibly be ready to go to college, graduate, and get a job that will support them and their families?
Sonia, real quick, you want to kind of offer some insights on that, right? And then, another question, a follow-up question from this virtual learning conversation, Sonia, is there an aspect of, this reliance, this now heavy reliance on virtual learning that maybe concerns you? Maybe, because you were going, earlier you were saying that, hey, we need the experiential learning. We need to, teach things or create learning systems that explore subjects beyond just technical and STEM subjects, for example, right? We need to like open up the cultural experience. So, I mean, do you feel like maybe there's a confining kind of element to virtual learning that maybe concerns you? But I would love to also hear your thoughts on what Arlene was just talking about.
Yeah, there are a lot of thoughts going through my head. This panel has been really educational for me. Arlene's statistics are frightening, but it explains a lot of things. And so I think that the hybrid is actually really important, because as Senator Williams explained, like the classroom is really broader than just, and what Michelle was saying, it's just much broader than us sitting in a classroom. It's about touching and feeling and experiencing and meeting people. And, you know, when you think about when most of us were, or at least let me talk about myself, when I was growing up, you know, you were taught that you got an education to get a job, right? And so we went through the process, got our education, but then you realize like you need a lot more to be able to get a job, right? You need to be able to network, and to be able to network, which means you have to be able to feel comfortable having exchanges with people. And so there's a lot that we're not training our kids to do so that they can actually come out and not just have the book knowledge, but have the other pieces that are
like the soft skills, for example.
All of the soft skills, right? And we see that when we're interviewing young people who don't know how to sell themselves, don't feel comfortable networking, or are more insular, and so don't feel comfortable with broader groups or different types of people. And so corporations are going to need that. At the end of the day, you know, you can have the degree in X, Y, and Z, but to move up a corporate ladder, you're going to have analytical thinking. You're going to have to be creative. Like, what are we doing in our classrooms to really expand this creative process, which is, you know, I mean, I have a friend that I just spoke to just the other day who's concerned about some of the virtual practices of the school, because her daughter, who's a very good student, sometimes just goes on and turns on her computer and goes back to bed, right? And so she's not in the programs that they're using currently for some schools are not engaging kids in the virtual space. And so it's going to be, I think the hybrid is important. But like Senator Lockman was saying, we're still learning this story. Like, this is all brand new. This just happened in the last 12 months. So we're still figuring it out. We're you know, and hopefully we'll be able to take all the great aspects of it and implement more of those things, and then discard the things that, you know, that we don't need or don't serve us or don't work. But this is still an experiment in process. I think it's a good one. And it's just up to us to just be really attentive to it and take the best of what we can and apply it.
Mm-hmm. Senator Williams, there was a question, and Senator Lockman too. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. You know, first, if you want to respond to anything that was just said from Sonia, Michelle, and Arlene, but also it's a good question here from another audience member. There are some school systems that say they want parental involvement, but push back when parents, especially BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color parents, attempt to engage. How can we assist parents to engage in these classrooms or engage with these systems? That is a very important question. Go ahead, Senator Williams, some thoughts on that?
I think that is a very important question, because we see this across the country. As even in COVID, we've seen parents take some different routes, like creating pods for their children's learning. And we talked earlier about access. Well, you have more affluent parents who have the resources and the time to be able to get more involved in their children's learning. And I think this goes back to the inequity conversation that we're having, where you're a Black or a brown or biopic parent, you may not even have the bandwidth, because you're trying to make sure that you can put food on the table for those kids, let alone go create a pod and then go out and recruit a teacher who most can pay more than what a classroom teacher is making. So I think it comes down also, you know, to resources. And I saw that in the next question is, how is education funded? Yeah. And it's funded by the property tax. And how do we, you know, give parents the resources so that they have the time to get more involved? And I think these pods that they're creating is one way. I think just good down-home parental involvement. Remember, you know, my mother was president of the PTA, right? That's how parents got involved. And I think we need to kind of get back to some of those grassroots ideas about how do we create more accessible environments for Black and brown parents to participate and get them to engage with their classrooms. And I think we have to create an environment that makes them feel like, you know, I'm not just sending my kid to school and it's a babysitter, but, you know, how do parents really be able to get involved and invested in their students' education? And Charles, if you don't mind me saying real quickly here, is in regards to, you know, education funding, as legislators and others on the call, you know, there's always comes down to the budget, and it comes down to the School Finance Act on how we distribute monies down to districts. And I think where parents can take a greater voice in, you know, demanding where these dollars are going for their kids and in the classrooms. But it comes down to, you know, that school finance formula. And here in Colorado, I had an opportunity to pass a bill that said, I don't care where you live, where your zip code is, because we know there are affluent neighborhoods that bring in more property taxes that go towards education. And then we have poor communities and Black communities that were devastated, you know, by the mortgage foreclosure crisis.
Yeah.
And so we removed all of those barriers and said, no matter what type of classroom your child is in, what type of school they attend, whether it's brick and mortar, whether it's virtual, whether it's charter, that all kids receive the same amount of funding. And I think that's another way we can get parents involved, is get involved with their legislatures and their state representatives.
Yeah, that bandwidth question, and so I would love for you to expound on that. That bandwidth, you know, that Black, brown parents, especially Black parents, like even like I'll look at an example, for example, in the DC metropolitan area where a comparison between a Black middle class fortress like Prince George's County, which is like the largest concentration of Black middle class people in the country, and neighboring, say, Anne Arundel or Montgomery County, and you know, still even, but the Black parents in those households, they may be middle class, but everyone has to work, compared to, you know, majority white counties in like Fairfax County or Montgomery or Anne Arundel County, where, you know, you have at least, there's a lot of situations where in those white households, at least one of the parents can stay home. And so can get involved in those various like school activities. So it really is a resource problem. Go ahead, Senator Lockman.
Sure. Well, I wanted to start just by saying amen to everything that Senator Williams said, because she really covered it beautifully. I think, you know, kind of getting back to some of those traditional approaches to engagement. I was a PTA president in my daughter's elementary school. That was the beginning of my path to public service. And I think parent engagement is the critical piece that we continually stumble over to school quality. And I also agree that it's critically connected to, you know, the way we structure funding, the way we approach governance and things like that. So, you know, I guess to try to answer that question, I think we've also had an opportunity through the pandemic to re-envision what engagement looks like. I love going to school board meetings. As a former PTA president, it is my bread and butter. I love hearing people have conversations on that level. And the numbers of folks that we're seeing at our school board meetings, because of virtual access, you can be home, you can be feeding the kids, and you can be engaged with seeing what's going on in the school district, is phenomenal. And again, there's a strong demand that we continue to do things in ways that are more responsive to the way that we're actually living our lives, rather than just boil it down to, well, if you really cared about your kids, you'd be here in the cafeteria at 5 p.m., you know, having this conversation with other parents and principals who can physically be here. I think it's understanding that we can be more flexible in the ways that we engage folks. But I also think that we have to find ways to empower those families differently. I had lots and lots of ideas about that disparity between the middle class families who are able to bring a lot of fundraising and things to a school, and the way that shifts their relationship with the educators and administrators in that school. And I've been trying to figure out, how can I bring that to a school with less means and less resources of time. And there's some really interesting concepts about that, of resource sharing across schools in a diverse school district, and things like that. Because quite frankly, if you can give a group of parents a pot of money over which they have discretion in its spending, suddenly the educators and the administrators look at them a little differently, talk to them a little bit differently. And so it's how do we find ways to empower families and to influence that power structure differently, so that they're not treated as much like needy clients and more like peers as educators and parents, I think really should be. And so for me, it's really about educating parents right now to function in the system that we have, know what a school board election is, elect people who value parent engagement and are going to continue to put that pressure on the school district to do the most that they can to encourage it. And also for us as legislators to create funding systems that have that transparency so that the average parent can understand where the money's going and become that advocate. So that's just sort of the short way. We could definitely have a whole hour just on how to better empower parents and communities. But
speaking of which, actually, this hour we already ran out on. So we actually went a little bit over time, and I have to wrap it up too, out of consideration for everyone's schedule and people watching us as well. But so I'm going to give you the last word, Senator Lockman. Really appreciate this discussion. We are going to have a part two. I really do believe we're going to have a part two real soon. I want to bring everyone back. That was Senator Elizabeth Lockman, who is senator out of Delaware, is in the Delaware General Assembly. Before her was Senator Angela Williams in Colorado, who is a part of the Colorado State Senate, Colorado General Assembly, also does work in external affairs for Stride Incorporated. Sonia Allen is a communications and career strategist. Check out her book, I Kick Ass at Work. So definitely we'll be checking that out soon. And Arlene Sukarin is vice president at TNTP. And thank you. First time on a micro summit, movement summit series here on CSG East, as Sonia was her first time too. Michelle Harvey, it's not your first time. Vice president at Learn for Life and learnforlife.org for more there. Also want to thank State Representative Christina Sappi. Thank you for your comments and your questions, representing parts of Chester County in Pennsylvania. So really appreciate that. PAHouse.com, obviously, for the Pennsylvania General Assembly. But thanks so much for everyone participating in the questions and the comments. Really appreciate this. I'm Charles Ellison, and I've been your moderator for this movement series session. Go to csg-erc.org for more information. Also go to #movement series and #Black Ed Chat for more there on this conversation. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, be safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.